The blood on her split lip had dried to a dark crimson, and her left eye was swollen nearly shut when Xander Vaughn found her crumpled behind the general store in Tonopah, Nevada. He had come down from his mountain cabin for supplies, which he did only twice a year, and the sight of the young woman huddled against the weathered wood planks made something fierce and protective surge through his chest like a wildfire. It was late autumn in 1883, and the desert air had turned crisp as the sun began its descent toward the distant peaks. Xander had just loaded his pack mule with flour, coffee, and ammunition when he heard the soft whimper coming from the alley between the general store and the assayer's office. His hand had instinctively gone to the knife at his belt, expecting maybe a wounded animal, but what he found was far worse. She looked up at him with one terrified green eye, the other swollen shut, and tried to scramble backward even though there was nowhere to go. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing bruises that made Xander's jaw clench so hard he thought his teeth might crack. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her bruised face. "Easy now," Xander said, his deep voice softer than he usually bothered to make it. He crouched down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm like he would with a frightened deer. "I'm not going to hurt you." The woman stared at him with that one good eye, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Xander could see her taking in his appearance, the long, dark hair that fell past his shoulders, the thick beard, the buckskin jacket stretched across shoulders broader than most men could claim. He was a big man, standing well over 6 feet with muscles built from years of surviving alone in the mountains, and he knew he probably looked more dangerous than comforting right now. "Who did this to you?" he asked, though the white-hot anger already building in his gut told him he would hunt down whoever was responsible. She shook her head slightly, then winced at the movement. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse like she had been screaming. "Please just go. He will kill you if he finds you talking to me." Xander's eyes narrowed. "He?" Before she could answer, a harsh voice bellowed from the main street. Clara Voss, you get yourself out here right now." The woman, Clara, went absolutely rigid with terror. Her whole body began to shake, and Xander watched as she seemed to fold in on herself, making herself smaller, trying to disappear into the shadows. "That him?" Xander asked, his voice barely above a growl. Clara nodded, tears spilling from her good eye. "My husband. Please, you have to go. He will hurt you too." Xander had lived alone in the mountains for the better part of 8 years, avoiding human contact except for these rare supply runs. He had learned to be hard, to keep to himself, to let the world below handle its own problems. But looking at this broken young woman cowering in the dirt, something inside him that he thought had died a long time ago came roaring back to life. "Can you stand?" he asked. Clara looked confused. "What?" "Can you stand up? We are leaving. Now." "I cannot," she said, more tears flowing. "He will find me. He always finds me. I tried to run once before, and he dragged me back and locked me in the cellar for 3 days." The fury that blazed through Xander at those words was unlike anything he had felt in years. He had seen cruelty before, had witnessed the worst that men could do to each other during his time as a scout for the army before he retreated to the mountains. But something about this particular brand of evil, a man who would brutalize his own wife, made him want to tear the world apart with his bare hands. "He will not find you where I am taking you," Xander said with absolute certainty. "Now, are you coming with me, or are you planning to let him beat you to death behind this store?" The blunt words seemed to cut through Clara's fear. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because she nodded slowly and tried to push herself up. Her legs gave out immediately, and Xander caught her before she could fall, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Clara." The voice was closer now, and Xander could hear heavy footsteps coming down the alley. Xander moved fast, carrying Clara toward the back of the building where his mule waited. He settled her on the animal's back, ignoring her soft cry of pain, and grabbed the lead rope. They had to move now, before her husband rounded the corner. They almost made it. "What the hell do you think you were doing with my wife?" The man who appeared at the end of the alley was shorter than Xander, but thick through the middle, with a red face and mean little eyes. He wore a shopkeeper's apron, and Xander realized with disgust that this man probably served customers with a smile while hiding what he did to his wife behind closed doors. "Your wife is coming with me," Xander said simply, positioning himself between the mule and the approaching man. "The hell she is!" The shopkeeper's hand went to his belt, and Xander saw the pistol holstered there. "That is my property you are stealing, mountain man. In this town, we hang thieves." "In any decent town, they lock up men who beat women," Xander replied, his voice deadly calm. His own pistol was within easy reach, and unlike the soft shopkeeper, Xander had spent years where a fraction of a second meant the difference between living and dying. The shopkeeper must have seen something in Xander's eyes because he hesitated. "She belongs to me. We are married, legal and proper. You got no right." "I have every right to stop a man from killing someone," Xander said. "Now you can walk away and tell everyone your wife ran off, or we can settle this another way. Your choice." Behind him, Clara made a small sound of fear. "Please, just let him go. I will come back. Please do not get hurt because of me." "Not happening," Xander said without taking his eyes off the shopkeeper. The standoff lasted maybe 10 seconds, though it felt like hours. The shopkeeper's hand twitched toward his pistol, and Xander was already moving when the man's fingers closed around the grip. Xander's own weapon cleared leather faster than a rattlesnake strike, the barrel leveled at the shopkeeper's chest before the other man had even raised his gun halfway. "Drop it," Xander ordered. The shopkeeper's face went from red to purple with rage, but he let the pistol fall back into its holster. "You are a dead man, you hear me? I got friends in this town, important friends. They will hunt you down for this." "They can try," Xander said. He backed toward his mule, keeping his gun trained on the shopkeeper until he reached the animal. In one smooth motion, he holstered his weapon and grabbed the lead rope, pulling the mule into a trot that quickly became a run once they cleared the building. Clara clung to the mule's neck, her face pressed against its mane as Xander led them through the back streets of Tonopah. The sun was sinking fast now, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. Xander knew these mountains and valleys better than any man alive, and once they got clear of town, no one would be able to track them in the dark. They ran for nearly an hour, Xander's long legs eating up the distance while the mule kept pace beside him. Only when they were miles from town, climbing into the foothills where the sage gave way to juniper and pinyon pine, did he finally slow down. Clara had gone silent on the mule's back, and when Xander glanced up at her, he saw that she had passed out, whether from pain or exhaustion or relief. He could not tell. The moon was rising by the time Xander found a suitable place to camp, a small hollow protected by rocks where he could build a fire without it being visible from below. He lifted Clara down from the mule with careful hands, noting how light she felt, how fragile. When had she last eaten a full meal? Her husband looked well-fed enough, but Clara was thin beneath her torn dress, almost gaunt. Xander laid her on his bedroll and covered her with a thick wool blanket before setting about making camp. His hands worked automatically, building a fire, unpacking supplies, setting water to boil. He had lived alone for so long that these tasks were second nature, but having another person there, even an unconscious one, felt strange and unsettling. When the coffee was ready, Clara stirred. Her good eye opened slowly, and Xander watched confusion cross her battered face as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Then, memory crashed back, and she sat up too quickly, crying out at the pain the movement caused. "Easy," Xander said, moving to her side. "You are safe. We are miles from town." Clara looked around wildly, her breath coming fast. "He will come after me. You do not understand. Daniel has connections. He knows the sheriff, the mayor. They will say I am his property, that you kidnapped me." "Let them say whatever they want," Xander replied. "They will not find us where we are going." "Where are we going?" Xander poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "My cabin. It is another day's travel into the mountains. No one knows where it is except me, and I plan to keep it that way." Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, though Xander noticed they were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. He wanted to ask her how long this had been going on, how many times her husband had hurt her, but he could see she was barely holding herself together as it was. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice small. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." Xander was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Because I remember what it is like to feel helpless. Because I have seen too much cruelty in this world and have done nothing about it. Because you needed help, and I was there. He will kill you if he finds you, Clara said, tears streaming down her face now. He killed his first wife. Everyone in town knows it, but no one says anything because he has money and influence. He made it look like an accident, pushed her down the stairs and said she fell. But I know the truth. He told me what he did to her, told me the same thing would happen to me if I ever tried to leave. The rage that filled Xander at those words was cold and dark and absolute. His hands clenched into fists, and he had to take several deep breaths before he trusted himself to speak. How long have you been married to him? 2 years. He courted me in Carson City, where I was working as a seamstress. He seemed kind at first, generous. He told me he would take care of me, give me a good life. I did not have any family left, no one to warn me or protect me. By the time I realized what kind of man he really was, it was too late. We were married, and in the eyes of the law, I belonged to him. Xander wanted to tell her that no person could belong to another, that the law was wrong, but he knew the reality of their situation. Women had precious few rights, especially married women. If they went to any town, any sheriff, Clara would be returned to her husband like lost property. The only way to truly save her was to take her somewhere beyond the reach of civilization, somewhere the law could not touch. "Drink your coffee," he said finally. "Then we need to look at those injuries. Some of them might need tending." Clara touched her swollen eye gingerly. "It looks worse than it is. He usually knows where to hit so it does not show. But today I fought back, and he got angry." "Good," Xander said, surprising them both. "Fighting back is good. It means you have not given up." Something flickered in Clara's expression, a spark of the person she might have been before Daniel Voss tried to break her spirit. "I will never give up. I would rather die than go back to him." "You will not have to do either," Xander promised. "Now let me see those ribs. The way you are holding yourself tells me he got you good there." Clara hesitated, then slowly pulled up the side of her torn dress to reveal a mass of purple and black bruises spreading across her rib cage. Xander had to turn away for a moment, fighting the urge to march back to Tonopah and put a bullet in Daniel Voss's head. "None of them feel broken," Clara said quietly. "I have had broken ribs before. I know what that feels like." The casual way she said it, like broken ribs were just a normal part of life, made Xander feel sick. He pulled out his medical supplies, such as they were, and began cleaning the cut on her lip with whiskey. She hissed at the sting, but did not pull away. "This is going to leave you sore for a while," he said, wrapping a length of cloth around her ribs to bind them. "But you will heal." "Will I?" Clara asked, and Xander knew she was not just talking about her physical injuries. He met her gaze, his dark eyes serious. "Yes, it will take time, but you will heal. All of you." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the distant howl of a coyote. Xander made a simple meal of beans and hardtack, and though Clara picked at her food, she managed to eat more than he expected. When she was finished, exhaustion seemed to crash over her like a wave. "Sleep," Xander said, gesturing to the bedroll. "I will keep watch." "Where will you sleep?" "I will not. Not tonight. We are too close to town still, and I want to make sure no one followed us." Clara started to protest, then seemed to realize she did not have the energy. She laid back down on the bedroll, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know I already said it, but thank you. You saved my life today." "Get some rest," was all Xander said, but something in his chest felt tight and strange. He sat by the fire through the long night, his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness for any sign of pursuit. Clara slept fitfully, crying out several times from nightmares that Xander could only imagine. Each time she woke, he was there, speaking softly until she calmed and drifted off again. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Xander finally allowed himself to relax slightly. They had made it through the night without incident. Now they just needed to get to his cabin, and Clara would be safe. He looked over at the sleeping woman, noting how young she looked with her face relaxed in sleep, the fear temporarily absent. She was beautiful even with the bruises, with delicate features and that mass of auburn hair. But it was not her beauty that had made him risk his life to save her. It was the look in her eye when she had begged him to leave, to save himself instead of helping her. It was the resignation in her voice when she talked about her husband finding her. It was the absolute courage it must have taken to fight back one more time, knowing what the consequences would be. Clara Voss was a survivor, and Xander respected that more than anything else in the world. She woke an hour later. Xander had breakfast ready and the camp packed. Clara moved stiffly, wincing with every motion, but she did not complain. She ate the cornmeal mush he offered, drank the strong coffee, and nodded when he said they needed to move. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can manage." Getting her onto the mule was a painful process that left Clara pale and sweating, but once she was settled, she gripped the animal's mane with determination. Xander led them higher into the mountains, following trails that were invisible to anyone who did not know they were there. The terrain grew rougher, the air thinner and colder. By midday, patches of snow appeared in the shadows where the sun could not reach. "How much farther?" Clara asked, her voice tight with pain. "Another few hours. Can you make it?" "I have to, do I not?" She tried to smile, but it turned into a grimace. Xander stopped and pulled out his canteen, handing it to her. "We can rest if you need to." "No, the farther we get from Tonopah, the safer we are. I can rest when we get to your cabin." Her determination impressed him. Most people, man or woman, would have been begging to stop by now. But Clara pushed on, her jaw set, her good eye fixed on the trail ahead. The sun was beginning its descent when they finally reached the hidden valley where Xander had built his cabin. It was a perfect location, sheltered on three sides by steep mountain walls, with a clear stream running through it and enough flat land for a small garden and corral. The cabin itself was solid, built from logs Xander had cut and notched himself, with a stone fireplace and a real glass window he had packed up piece by piece. Clara stared at it with something like wonder. "You built this yourself?" "Every inch of it. Took me nearly a year, but it is home." He helped her down from the mule, catching her when her legs gave out. Without a word, he swept her up into his arms and carried her into the cabin, setting her gently on the bed that took up one corner of the single room. It was not much, just a simple frame with a corn husk mattress, but it was clean and dry, and after 2 nights of sleeping on the ground, it probably looked like heaven to Clara. "Rest," he ordered. "I need to see to the mule and secure the area." But Clara caught his arm as he turned to leave. "What is your name? You saved my life, and I do not even know what to call you." "Xander Vaughn." "Thank you, Xander Vaughn," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a chance to live." Xander nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and went back outside. He took his time caring for the mule, unpacking the supplies, checking the perimeter of his small valley. The familiar tasks helped settle his mind, which had been racing since the moment he found Clara behind that store. What had he done? He had just kidnapped a man's wife, regardless of how justified the reasons. He had made himself a fugitive, assuming Daniel Voss really did have the connections Clara claimed. His peaceful, solitary life was over, at least for the foreseeable future. And for what? For a woman he did not know, whose mere presence in his cabin complicated everything. But then he thought of her bruised face, her broken voice, the way she had tried to protect him even though she was the one who needed protecting. He thought of the strength it must have taken to survive 2 years with a man who killed his first wife. He thought of the way she had looked at him when he promised she would heal. No, he had done the right thing. He would do it again without hesitation. By the time he went back inside, full dark had fallen. Clara was asleep on the bed, her breathing deep and even. Xander built up the fire, set a pot of stew to warming, and settled into his chair to keep watch. It was a routine that would become familiar over the coming weeks, watching over Clara while she slept, making sure she was safe, waiting for the nightmares to come. The first week passed slowly. Clara's physical injuries began to heal, the swelling around her eye going down, the bruises fading from purple to yellow-green. But the deeper wounds were harder to see and even harder to treat. She startled at sudden movements, flinched when Xander spoke too loudly, and often woke in the night screaming. Xander did his best to give her space while still making sure she had everything she needed. He was not used to sharing his space with anyone, and the cabin that had seemed perfectly adequate for one person felt impossibly small with 2. but they developed a rhythm. He would wake early and tend to the animals, giving Clara privacy to wash and dress. She would make breakfast, while he checked his traps and cut firewood. They would eat together in companionable silence, then spend the day on separate tasks. Clara proved to be resourceful and hard-working despite her injuries. She took over the cooking and cleaning without being asked, mended Xander's worn clothes with neat, expert stitches, and even started organizing his chaotic collection of supplies. She seemed to need to be useful, to earn her keep, and Xander did not try to stop her, even though he wanted to tell her she did not owe him anything. "You were a seamstress?" he asked one evening as he watched her repair one of his shirts. Her stitches were tiny and precise, far better than his own rough attempts at mending. "Yes, in Carson City. I worked for a dress shop, doing alterations and custom work. It was not much, but it was honest work, and I was good at it." Clara's voice held a wistfulness that tugged at something in Xander's chest. "I had a small room above the shop, and I was saving money to maybe open my own business one day. Then Daniel came along and ruined everything." "You could do that again," Xander said. "Open your own shop, I mean, when enough time has passed and it is safe." Clara shook her head. "Daniel would find me. He told me once that he would hunt me to the ends of the earth if I ever left him. I believe he meant it." "He would have to get through me first," Xander said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. Clara looked up at him, something unreadable in her green eyes. "Why? Why do you care so much about what happens to me? You do not know me. You have given up your peace, your safety, maybe even your life for a complete stranger. Why would you do that?" Xander was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Why had he done it? The easy answer was that it was the right thing to do, that any decent person would have helped, but it was more than that, something he could not quite put into words. "I was married once," he said finally, the words feeling strange in his mouth. He had not talked about Mary in years. "Her name was Mary. We met in Missouri, got married young. I was working as a scout for the Army, gone for months at a time. One day I came home and found her dead. Cholera had swept through the town while I was away. No one had been able to reach me in time to tell me she was sick." Clara's hand had stilled on the shirt, her attention fully on him now. "I fell apart after that," Xander continued. "Blamed myself for not being there, for choosing my work over being with her. Eventually, I could not stand to be around people anymore, could not stand the pity in their eyes or the emptiness of the house we had planned to fill with children. So I came out here, as far from civilization as I could get, and I told myself I was done with caring about anyone or anything." "What changed?" Clara asked softly. "You did. I saw you behind that store, and I saw someone who needed help more than anyone I had ever seen. And I realized that hiding in the mountains for the rest of my life was not honoring Mary's memory. She would have helped you without a second thought. She would have been furious with me for even considering walking away." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I'm so sorry about your wife. That must have been unbearable." "It was. For a long time it was. But maybe saving you is my way of making peace with not being able to save her." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the wind outside. Finally, Clara set aside her mending and moved to sit beside Xander's chair. She hesitated, then reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his calloused palm. "Thank you for telling me that," she said, "and thank you for saving me, even if I cannot ever fully repay that debt." "There is no debt," Xander said firmly. "You do not owe me anything, Clara. I want you to understand that." "Then let me help you because I want to, not because I owe you. Let me make a home here, at least for as long as I can stay." Xander looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his scarred, weathered skin and her pale, delicate fingers. Something shifted in his chest, a wall he had built around his heart beginning to crack. "You can stay as long as you want," he said. "Forever, if that is what you need." Clara smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her whole face. "Forever is a long time. I've got plenty of that out here." As the weeks turned into a month, then two, Clara continued to heal. The physical bruises faded completely, and she gained back some of the weight she had lost. But more importantly, she began to seem less haunted, less like a frightened animal waiting for the next blow. She laughed more, talked more, and slowly started to become the person she must have been before Daniel Voss entered her life. Winter arrived early in the mountains that year, blanketing everything in snow by early November. Xander had prepared well, with plenty of firewood stacked against the cabin and enough supplies to last until spring. The valley became a white wonderland, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Being snowed in together forced an intimacy that neither of them had expected. The cabin was small, and there was nowhere to go for privacy except outside into the bitter cold. They learned each other's habits and quirks, learned to move around each other in the confined space, learned to read each other's moods without words. Xander found himself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit by the fire, Clara sewing or reading from his small collection of books while he carved wood or cleaned his guns. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. He learned that Clara loved music, but could not carry a tune to save her life, that she was terrified of spiders but had once fought off a rabid dog with nothing but a broom, that she wanted children someday, a whole house full of them, but had been secretly relieved when she never got pregnant during her marriage to Daniel, because she could not stand the thought of bringing a child into that house of horrors. Clara learned that Xander could track a deer through solid rock, or so it seemed, that he had a surprising talent for sketching and had filled several journals with drawings of plants and animals, that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a Cheyenne arrow and another on his right leg from a grizzly bear, and both times he had survived by sheer stubbornness and luck, that he had been an only child whose parents had died when he was 16, leaving him alone in the world until he met Mary. The more time they spent together, the more Xander found his feelings shifting from protective concern to something deeper and more complicated. He caught himself watching Clara when she was not looking, admiring the way the firelight caught in her auburn hair, the grace of her movements despite the hardships she had endured. He found excuses to be near her, to brush against her in passing, to hear her laugh at something he said. It terrified him. He had not felt this way since Mary, had not wanted to feel this way again. Caring about someone meant opening yourself up to loss, to pain, to all the things he had fled into the mountains to escape. But Clara was already under his skin, already embedded in his heart whether he wanted her there or not. One evening in late December, a massive blizzard rolled into the valley. The wind howled like a living thing, battering the cabin's walls and piling snow up against the door. Xander kept the fire burning high, but the cold still crept in through every crack and crevice. Clara shivered despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I have never seen a storm like this." "It is a bad one," Xander agreed. "We might be stuck inside for a few days until it passes." As if to punctuate his words, a particularly violent gust shook the cabin, and Clara jumped. Without thinking, Xander moved to sit beside her on the bed, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She tensed for just a moment, then relaxed into his warmth, tucking herself against his side. "Sorry," she murmured. "I know I should be used to storms by now, but something about this one feels different." "Nothing to apologize for," Xander said, very aware of how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to hold her. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside. Xander felt Clara's breathing slowly even out, felt her body grow heavy with approaching sleep. He should move, should let her lie down properly, but he could not bring himself to break contact. "Xander?" Clara's voice was soft, hesitant. Yes? Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you ever think about the future? About what happens when spring comes and the snow melts?" Xander's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because I think about it all the time," Clara admitted. "I think about whether Daniel is still looking for me, whether it will ever be safe to go back to civilization. I think about whether I can really stay here forever, hiding in the mountains. And I think about you, about what you must have given up to keep me safe." "I have not given up anything I care about," Xander said firmly. "This cabin, this life. It was enough when I was alone. But now, with you here, it feels like more than enough. It feels like home." Clara pulled back just enough to look up at him, her green eyes searching his face. "What are you saying?" Xander took a deep breath, knowing he was about to step off a cliff with no idea if there was solid ground below. I am saying that I do not want you to leave. I am saying that somewhere along the way, you stopped being someone I saved and became someone I cannot imagine living without. I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Clara Voss, and I do not know what to do about it." Clara's eyes went wide, and for a terrible moment, Xander thought he had made a horrible mistake, that he had ruined everything with his confession. But then she smiled, that beautiful, real smile that lit up her whole face, and she reached up to cup his bearded cheek with her hand. "You do not have to do anything about it," she whispered, "because I am falling in love with you too." Xander felt something inside his chest break open, years of loneliness and grief pouring out to be replaced with something bright and warm and terrifying. He lowered his head slowly, giving Clara every opportunity to pull away, and when she did not, he kissed her. It was gentle and careful, mindful of all she had been through, but Clara made a soft sound and pressed closer, her fingers tangling in his long hair. The kiss deepened, and Xander felt like he was drowning in the best possible way. This was nothing like the desperate passion he had shared with Mary when they were young. This was something richer, more profound, built on understanding and trust and the knowledge of how fragile happiness could be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara was crying. Xander wiped away her tears with his thumbs, his hands cradling her face like she was made of spun glass. "Did I hurt you?" he asked, concerned. "No," Clara said, laughing through her tears. "No, I'm just so happy. I did not think I would ever feel happy again, and here you are, making me feel like I can fly." "I will never hurt you," Xander promised, his voice fierce. "I will never raise my hand to you, never force you to do anything you do not want to do, never make you feel like you are less than the incredible woman you are. I swear it on my life." "I know," Clara said simply. "I have known that since the first moment I saw you. You have the kindest eyes I have ever seen." They held each other through the rest of the storm, sometimes talking, sometimes kissing, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. When they finally lay down to sleep, Clara curled up against Xander's chest like she belonged there, and for the first time since Mary died, Xander felt truly at peace. The winter passed in a blur of quiet joy. Xander and Clara navigated this new dimension of their relationship carefully, both aware of how fragile trust could be. Xander never pushed for more than Clara was ready to give, and Clara slowly learned that not all men were like Daniel, that gentleness and respect were not just tricks to lure her into complacency. They kissed often, stolen moments of sweetness that never failed to make Xander's heart race. They held hands while sitting by the fire. They slept tangled together in the narrow bed, finding comfort and warmth in each other's presence. And slowly, carefully, Clara began to heal in ways that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. One evening in late February, as the worst of the winter was beginning to break, Clara brought up the subject of marriage. "I am still legally married to Daniel," she said quietly. "In the eyes of the law, I am his wife. I do not know if I can ever get a divorce, especially if he does not agree to it, which means I might never be able to marry you, not properly." Xander pulled her closer on the bed they now shared. "I do not care about legal documents or what the law says. In my heart, you are already mine, and I am yours. That is all that matters to me." "But it is not fair to you," Clara protested. "You deserve a wife who can give you her name, who can stand beside you without shame or secrets." "Clara, look at me." Xander waited until her eyes met his. "I left civilization behind years ago. I do not care about their laws or their rules. Out here, we make our own rules, and my rule is that you are my wife in every way that matters. If you want to marry me, we will marry each other right here, in this cabin, and that will be more real than any piece of paper." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that? You would marry me even though it would not be legal?" "I would marry you every day for the rest of my life, if that is what you wanted." "Then yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I want to marry you, Xander Vaughn. I want to be your wife in every way that matters." They married themselves 3 days later, on a clear, cold morning when the sun turned the snow to diamonds. There was no preacher, no witnesses, no official ceremony. Instead, they stood together in the center of the cabin, holding hands and speaking vows they wrote themselves. "I promise to love you for as long as I live," Xander said, his deep voice steady and sure. "I promise to protect you, to provide for you, to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to be faithful, to be kind, to be the man you deserve. I promise to build a life with you that is full of joy and free from fear." Clara's voice was thick with emotion as she replied, "I promise to love you with my whole heart. I promise to be your partner, your friend, your home. I promise to trust you, to believe in you, to stand by your side no matter what challenges we face. I promise to build a life with you that honors the gift you have given me, the gift of freedom and hope and love." They sealed their vows with a kiss that felt like a promise, like a beginning, like everything right in the world condensed into a single perfect moment. When they pulled apart, Xander produced 2 simple bands he had carved from elk antlers, and they slipped them onto each other's fingers. "I know it is not much," Xander said, looking down at the crude ring on Clara's slender finger. "It is perfect," Clara said firmly. "It is real and honest and made with love. I would not trade it for the fanciest gold ring in the world." That night, for the first time, they came together as husband and wife. Xander was endlessly patient and gentle, erasing the nightmare of Clara's first marriage with tenderness and care. Clara cried afterward, but they were tears of release, of healing, of finally understanding what it meant to be loved instead of owned. "Are you all right?" Xander asked, holding her close in the darkness. "I am more than all right," Clara said. "I am whole. You made me whole again, Xander." As spring arrived and the snow began to melt, they fell into a new rhythm as a married couple. The physical side of their relationship deepened, but it was the emotional intimacy that truly bound them together. They worked side by side in the garden Clara planted, grew a bond that felt unbreakable, and made plans for the future. "We could build another room onto the cabin," Xander suggested one warm afternoon in April. "Make it bigger for when children come." Clara's hand instinctively went to her stomach, though there was no sign of pregnancy yet. "You really want children?" "With you? More than anything." "I want that too," Clara admitted. "I used to be so afraid of the idea, but with you, it feels like the most natural thing in the world." They spent the summer improving the cabin and the valley, building fences, expanding the garden, making the place more of a permanent home. Xander taught Clara to shoot, to fish, to track and hunt. Clara taught Xander to cook more than just basic trail food, to appreciate the small comforts that made a house a home. They talked sometimes about whether Daniel was still looking for Clara, but as the months passed with no sign of pursuit, they began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had truly escaped. Perhaps Daniel had decided she was not worth the effort of tracking into the remote mountains. Perhaps he had told everyone she died and moved on to find another victim. Whatever the reason, they were safe, and that was all that mattered. In late summer, Clara confirmed what they had both suspected. She was pregnant. The news filled them both with a joy so intense it was almost frightening. "We are going to have a baby," Clara said, her voice full of wonder. Xander pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "We are going to have a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Xander hovered over her like an anxious bear, trying to find anything that would help. As fall arrived and her belly began to swell with new life, they both became more cautious, more protective of the happiness they had built. One October afternoon, when Clara was about 5 months along, Xander returned from checking his traps to find her standing outside the cabin, staring down the trail that led to the valley. Her face was pale, her whole body tense. "What is wrong?" Xander asked, his hand going automatically to his rifle. "I thought I saw someone," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Down there, at the mouth of the valley. Just for a moment, I thought I saw a rider." Xander scanned the tree line, but saw nothing. "Are you sure?" "No, maybe I imagined it. Maybe I'm just being paranoid." But Clara's hand was pressed protectively over her stomach, and Xander could see the fear in her eyes. "Go inside," he said gently. "Lock the door. I'm going to scout around, make sure everything is clear." Clara grabbed his arm. "Be careful, please. Always." Xander spent the rest of the afternoon and into the evening searching every inch of the valley and the surrounding forest. He found no sign of anyone, no tracks, no evidence that anyone had been near their sanctuary. By the time he returned to the cabin, full dark had fallen, and Clara was frantic with worry. "I found nothing," he assured her. "The valley is secure. It was probably just a deer or an elk moving through the trees." "You are right," Clara said, visibly trying to calm herself. "I am sorry. I'm just being foolish." "You are not foolish. You are being careful, and that is good." Xander pulled her close, feeling their child move between them. "But we are safe here, Clara. I promise you, we are safe." He believed it when he said it. He wanted so badly to believe it that he ignored the small voice in the back of his mind, telling him something was not right. It was a mistake that would nearly cost them everything. 3 nights later, Xander woke to the smell of smoke. He was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his rifle and shoving his feet into his boots. Beside him, Clara sat up, confusion turning to terror as she registered the smell. "Fire?" she asked. "Stay here," Xander ordered, but Clara was already getting up, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Xander threw open the door and saw his worst nightmare. The corral was on fire, the dry wood going up like kindling. And standing in the yard, illuminated by the flames, was Daniel Voss. He was holding a torch in one hand and a pistol in the other, and his face was twisted with rage. "There you are," Daniel said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Did you really think you could steal my wife and get away with it?" Xander stepped out of the cabin, keeping his body between Daniel and the door, between this monster and Clara. "Leave now, and we will all walk away from this." "Walk away?" Daniel laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "I have spent months tracking you down, following every lead, paying every informant. I have lost business, lost standing in my community, all because you took what belongs to me. And you think I am just going to walk away?" "Clara does not belong to you," Xander said, his voice deadly calm despite the fury building in his chest. "She never did. The law says different. And when I drag her back to Tonopah and tell them how you kidnapped her, how you brainwashed her and held her against her will, they will hang you like the criminal you are." Behind Xander, Clara appeared in the doorway. "No," she said, her voice stronger than Xander had ever heard it. "I will not let you hurt him." "Get back inside," Xander said without taking his eyes off Daniel. "No," Clara repeated. She moved to stand beside Xander, her hand gripping his arm. "This has to end, Daniel. I will not go back with you. I would rather die." "That can be arranged," Daniel said, raising his pistol. Everything happened very fast after that. Daniel fired, the shot going wide as Xander shoved Clara back toward the cabin. Xander brought his rifle up and fired back, but in the chaos and the flickering light from the burning corral, his shot also missed. Daniel ducked behind the water trough, firing again, and this time the bullet struck the cabin wall inches from Xander's head. "Get inside and stay down!" Xander roared at Clara, and this time she listened, disappearing into the cabin. The firefight lasted maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Daniel had the advantage of cover and multiple weapons, but Xander knew every inch of this valley, every shadow and hiding place. He moved like a ghost, circling around, using the smoke and darkness to his advantage. In the end, it came down to skill and experience. Daniel was a shopkeeper playing at being tough. Xander was a man who had survived years in the wilderness, who had fought in battles and won. When Daniel broke cover to try to get a better angle on the cabin, Xander was ready. The shot took Daniel in the chest, dropping him like a stone. Xander approached carefully, rifle trained on the fallen man, but he could see the light already fading from Daniel's eyes. The wound was fatal, and they both knew it. "She was mine," Daniel gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. "She was mine, and you took her." "She was never yours," Xander said coldly. "No person belongs to another." Daniel tried to say something else, but death took him before he could form the words. Xander stood there for a long moment, looking down at the man who had caused Clara so much suffering, feeling nothing but a cold satisfaction that he would never hurt anyone again. Then he heard Clara screaming his name. He ran back to the cabin to find her standing in the doorway, her shawl clutched to her chest. "Xander, oh God, are you hurt?" "I am fine," he said, pulling her into his arms and feeling her shake against him. "It is over. He is dead. It is over." Clara sobbed against his chest, months of fear and tension finally releasing in a flood of tears. Xander held her, stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances until she finally calmed. Only then did he notice the wetness spreading across her skirt. "Clara," he said, pulling back to look at her. "Are you bleeding?" "My water broke," Clara said, her voice suddenly small and frightened. "The baby is coming." Of all the things Xander had faced in his life, from hostile tribes to wild animals to desperate shootouts, nothing terrified him more than the prospect of helping Clara give birth. But there was no one else, no doctor or midwife within days of travel. It was just the two of them and their child who had decided to arrive early. He got Clara back to bed, then spent the next few minutes in a controlled panic, trying to remember everything Mary had told him about childbirth years ago. He boiled water, gathered clean cloths, made sure there was plenty of light. The corral was still burning outside, but he could not spare the time to deal with it now. Clara's labor was long and difficult. She was so small, and the baby had decided to come early, perhaps triggered by the stress of the confrontation. Xander held her hand, wiped the sweat from her face, and felt completely helpless as she screamed through the contractions. "I cannot do this," Clara gasped during a brief respite from the pain. "It hurts too much. I cannot." "Yes, you can," Xander said firmly, remembering Mary's words. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Clara. You survived 2 years with that monster. You can survive this." "I am so scared." "I know. I am scared too. But we are going to do this together, and in a few hours, we are going to have our baby, our child, Clara. Think about that." Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face, and gripped his hand tighter as another contraction took her. Dawn was breaking when their son finally entered the world, small and red and absolutely perfect. Xander cleaned him off with shaking hands, wrapped him in a soft blanket, and placed him in Clara's arms. She looked down at the baby with an expression of pure wonder, all the pain and fear forgotten in that moment. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "He is perfect," Xander agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect. You did it, Clara." They named him Xavier, and he had Clara's green eyes and Xander's dark hair. Holding his son for the first time, feeling the weight of that tiny life in his arms, Xander felt something shift inside him. This was what mattered. Not the past, not the pain, not the years he had wasted hiding from life. This moment, this family, this love that felt big enough to fill the whole world. Outside, the fire had finally burned itself out. When Clara and the baby were both sleeping, Xander went out to assess the damage. The corral was destroyed, and he would need to rebuild it before winter. And there was Daniel's body, which he buried in an unmarked grave far from the cabin, in a place where nothing would ever grow. The next few months were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Xavier was a demanding baby, keeping them both up at all hours. But watching Clara with their son, seeing the joy and love on her face, made every sleepless night worth it. She was a natural mother, patient and gentle and completely devoted. "I never knew I could love someone this much," she said one night as she nursed Xavier by the fire. "It is almost frightening how much I love him, how much I love both of you." "I know exactly what you mean," Xander said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and looking down at their son. "I would tear the world apart for either of you." As winter arrived again, they settled into a new routine as a family of 3. The cabin felt crowded now, and Xander started making plans for that addition they had talked about. They would need more space as Xavier grew, and maybe room for more children if they were lucky. Clara bloomed in motherhood, gaining back the weight she had lost and glowing with health and happiness. The shadows that had haunted her eyes for so long were finally gone, replaced with a peace that Xander had never thought she would find. She sang to Xavier as she rocked him, silly made-up songs that made Xander smile. She laughed freely now, the sound filling the cabin with warmth. On a cold January evening, nearly a year after Clara had first arrived at the cabin bruised and broken, Xander found himself thinking about how much their lives had changed. He was cleaning his rifle while Clara nursed Xavier, and the domesticity of it, the simple, perfect normalcy, struck him with a force that took his breath away. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, noticing his expression. "Just how lucky I am," Xander said honestly. A year ago, I was alone, convinced I would spend the rest of my life that way. Now I have you and Xavier, and I cannot imagine going back to how things were before." "I think about that too," Clara said softly. "About how one terrible day led to the best thing that ever happened to me. If I had not fought back that last time, if you had not come to town that exact day, if you had not found me behind that store, I would probably be dead by now. Instead, I am here with you, with our son, happier than I ever thought possible." "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked. "This life, I mean. It is hard out here, isolated. You gave up any chance of having a normal life in a town, of having friends and neighbors and all the things that come with civilization." "Not for a single second," Clara said firmly. "This is my normal life now, and it is more real and honest than anything I had before. I have everything I need right here in this cabin, my husband, my son, my home. What more could I possibly want?" "More children?" Xander suggested with a slight smile. Clara laughed. "Eventually, yes. When Xavier's a bit older and I can sleep through the night again. But yes, I want to fill this cabin with children and love and noise." "Then that is what we will do," Xander promised. The years passed peacefully after that. They added on to the cabin, building 2 new rooms that gave them space to grow. Xavier grew into a sturdy, curious child who followed his father everywhere, learning to track and hunt and survive in the mountains. When he was 3, Clara gave birth to their daughter, a beautiful girl they named Catherine, who had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determination. 2 years after that, twin boys arrived, strong and healthy and absolutely exhausting. Clara joked that their cabin was beginning to feel like a schoolhouse, but her eyes shone with happiness as she said it. Xander built more furniture, expanded the garden, and found himself becoming expert at changing diapers and telling bedtime stories. Life in the mountains was hard, but it was good. They were completely self-sufficient, growing or hunting everything they needed. Twice a year, Xander would make the long trip to a distant trading post for supplies they could not make themselves. But otherwise, they remained isolated from the world below. Sometimes, travelers would stumble across their valley, lost or looking for shelter. Xander and Clara would offer hospitality, share a meal, and a warm bed, but they never revealed much about themselves. As far as anyone knew, they were just another family trying to carve out a life in the wilderness. No one questioned why Clara never went to town, why they kept to themselves, why Xander was so protective of his family. One spring evening, when Xavier was 10 and the twins were 5 and Catherine was 7, the children were playing outside while Xander and Clara sat on the porch they had built, watching the sunset over the mountains. "Do you think Daniel's family ever looked for him?" Clara asked suddenly. It was rare for her to mention her first husband, the wounds of that time long since healed. "Maybe at first," Xander said, "but it has been over 10 years. If they were going to find us, they would have by now." "I still think about it sometimes," Clara admitted. "What would happen if someone from my past showed up here? What would happen if the law came looking?" "Then we would deal with it," Xander said simply. "Together, like we deal with everything else." Clara leaned against his shoulder, and Xander wrapped his arm around her, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you," she said. "I do not think I tell you that enough. But I love you more than words can say, Xander Vaughn. You gave me back my life, and then you made it beautiful." "I love you too," Xander said, his voice rough with emotion. "You and those children are my whole world, Clara. Everything I do, everything I am, it is all for you." They sat there until the stars came out, listening to their children's laughter, feeling the warmth of each other's presence, and knowing they had built something rare and precious out of pain and fear and hope. Years continued to pass in their mountain sanctuary. Xavier grew into a young man who looked remarkably like his father, tall and broad-shouldered with quiet strength. He had his mother's kindness, though, her gentle way with words and her fierce protectiveness of his younger siblings. Catherine became a skilled craftswoman like her mother, learning to sew and cook and tend the garden, but she also had her father's love of the wilderness and could outshoot any of her brothers. The twins, Thomas and Theodore, were wild and rambunctious, always getting into trouble, but with hearts of gold. Clara continued to bloom with the years, aging gracefully, her auburn hair showing threads of silver that Xander thought made her even more beautiful. She had filled out from the gaunt, terrified woman he had found behind that store, and sometimes when she laughed with the children, Xander had to stop and marvel at the transformation. This was the woman she was always meant to be, free from fear and full of joy. When Xavier turned 18, he surprised them both by announcing he wanted to see something of the world beyond their valley. "Don, I am not leaving forever," he assured them, seeing the concern on their faces. "But I have spent my whole life in these mountains. I want to see a town, meet other people, understand what the rest of the world is like before I decide where I want to build my own life." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "You are a man now, Xavier. You have the right to make your own choices." "Your mother is right," Xander said, though the thought of his son venturing into the world made his protective instincts rage. "But promise me you will be careful. The world down there can be dangerous." "You taught me well," Xavier said. "I can handle myself." They sent him off with supplies and advice and more hugs than Xavier probably wanted, and then they waited anxiously for his return. He was gone for 3 months, and when he finally came back, he brought with him stories of towns and cities, of trains and telegraph lines, of a world that had changed dramatically since Xander and Clara had retreated to the mountains. "It is amazing," Xavier said, his eyes bright with excitement, "but it is also crowded and loud and false. People pretending to be things they are not, chasing money and status. I'm glad I went, glad I saw it, but I'm even more glad to be home." "So you are staying?" Clara asked hopefully. "For now. This is my home. These are my mountains. Maybe someday I will find a woman and want to build my own cabin nearby. But I'm in no rush. I have everything I need right here." The relief on Clara's face made Xander's heart ache. She had been so worried about losing her firstborn, about the world taking him away like she had almost been taken away herself. But Xavier had chosen them, chosen this life, and that meant everything. More years passed, and their children grew into adults. Catherine eventually did leave, marrying a young rancher she met when he got lost and stumbled into their valley. Xander was suspicious at first, but the young man, Samuel, proved himself to be honest and hard-working and absolutely devoted to Catherine. They built a cabin of their own 2 valleys over, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to have their own space. The twins became legendary trappers, ranging far and wide through the mountains, but always returning home. Xavier eventually did find a wife, a Shoshone woman named Little Dove, whose tribe sometimes camped in the high meadows. They married in a ceremony that blended both cultures and built a cabin within sight of Xander and Clara's, creating a small family compound. As Xander and Clara moved into their 50s, then their 60s, they found themselves surrounded by grandchildren, by the laughter and chaos of a family that had grown beyond their wildest dreams. The valley that had once been Xander's lonely refuge had become a thriving community, bound by love and loyalty, and the shared understanding of how precious their peace was. On a warm summer evening, when Clara was 65 and Xander was 68, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, just like they had done countless times before. Their hair was silver now, their bodies marked by the years of hard mountain living, but they still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the same love that had sparked in that small cabin so many years ago. "Do you remember the day you found me?" Clara asked, her voice still as clear and sweet as it had been in her youth. "Every detail," Xander said. "You were the bravest person I had ever seen, even then." "I was terrified. Bravery and terror are not opposites, they are companions. You were both, and you still chose to trust me." Clara squeezed his hand. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Xander corrected with a slight smile. "The best was agreeing to be my wife." "That was pretty good too," Clara agreed, laughing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their grandchildren play in the meadow below, listening to the familiar sounds of their valley settling into night. A lifetime had passed since that terrible, wonderful day in Tonopah, since Xander had found Clara bruised and broken behind that general store and decided to risk everything to save her. "I have been thinking," Clara said eventually, "about everything we have built here, everything our family has become. And I realized something." "What is that?" "That Daniel Voss actually did me a favor, in the most horrible way possible. If he had not been such a monster, I never would have ended up behind that store. I never would have met you. All of this, our children, Our grandchildren, this beautiful life we built, it exists because I survived him long enough for you to find me." "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Xander said. "Some things are just meant to be." "Maybe," Clara said. "But I am grateful anyway, for every twist and turn that led me to you. I am grateful for the mountain man who found me behind that store and took me far away from that town. I am grateful for every single day we have had together." "We still have plenty of days left," Xander said, pulling her closer. "I hope so. I want to meet all our great-grandchildren, watch Xavier's children grow up, see what kind of people the twins become when they finally settle down." "Then that is what we will do," Xander promised, "together, like always." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara rested her head on Xander's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. They had been through so much together, survived horrors and built wonders, and through it all, their love had remained constant and true. The mountains surrounded them, eternal and protective, and in their hidden valley, the family they had created continued to thrive. Children became parents, parents became grandparents, and the story of how it all began, of a mountain man and a broken woman and a single act of courage, became the foundation of something that would last for generations. They sat there until the moon rose, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love story out of tragedy and hope, who had proven that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. And as they finally stood to go inside, hand in hand just like they had been for over 40 years, they knew with absolute certainty that they had lived the life they were always meant to live, together. The end.